On this episode of Lockdown, I chat to Joel Stransky, the South African fly half, and as we know, the 1995 World Cup final victory for South Africa changed the face of rugby as we know today. Arguably, one of the most iconic things to happen in sport. So I can't wait to chat to him, talk about that famous drop goal, and also the lay of the land of rugby in South Africa right now. How's things though, mate? How are you getting on down in South Africa?
We're all good. Obviously, lockdown has been quite stringent and strict here, and I think overly onerous. But hopefully, we'll start seeing a phase out in the next few days, the next week or so. So it is what it is. We've been fortunate, and I suppose every cloud has a silver lining of some sort. We've tried to make the most of it.
I've been going through the archives on YouTube, as you do, and looking at some of the famous clips and stuff. I know some of the stuff that we'll probably chat about now, you've spoken about a lot, but just talk about as a nation then, in 1995, what it was like, the pressure, I suppose, with a home World Cup going into the final against New Zealand.
I think there's always pressure when you go into a massive game like that, and there's always a little bit of hometown expectation when you're playing at home. But I think on the other hand, we tried not to put pressure on ourselves because we were the underdogs. We'd come into the World Cup as rank outsiders. No one expected us to beat Australia in the opening game. No one really thought we'd progress to the final, and I think few people gave us a chance of winning it. It was almost a great achievement for us to have made the final. So, in a sense, we tried desperately hard to adopt that attitude and take the pressure off ourselves and just go out and play and do the best we possibly could and express ourselves on the day.
As you went through the tournament and you got to the final, did you realise going into that final, if you won that game, the change of the landscape as a country, but around the world? Did you realise the effect that going into that game could actually have on the world, not just rugby itself?
Ultimately, we didn't appreciate how big a moment it was. And I think, to be fair, had we not won, it wouldn't have changed anything. The fact that we made the final already kept our country in rapture for that whole time. It already meant that Nelson Mandela, this iconic leader, could use this Rugby World Cup to unify a nation, could wear the Springbok shirt before a Rugby World Cup final and hold hands, with white people and with other people from all different cultures. So I think the political side, we probably only realized afterwards how massive it was. We also, and in continuing from the question before, the fact that we went to Sun City, the fact that we tried to avoid the media and the all the pressure that comes with a home World Cup final.
One of the other iconic things in rugby we know is the haka, and I know that's evolved in recent years, but I've faced the haka twice, but I've faced the haka twice knowing that if we keep it under 50 points, that's a success. So for you in the final, facing the haka, just take us back to kind of them emotions. Did you have anything planned in the lead up? Did you eyeball your opposite man? What was the plan going into that?
There were a number of things we discussed pre the match that were really of great significance. Obviously, Jonah Lomu was a massive issue for us. How do you defend against someone so big, so strong, so good, such great feats, such a great skill set? And also we discussed how do you face up to this great challenge? We'd seen what had happened in the past when teams hadn't faced up to the challenge. We'd seen the Aussies turn their back on it. We'd seen other teams form a huddle. And it was, the overwhelming consensus in our group was the haka is one of those challenges that is laid down to you. It's not something to fear. It's something to use as a self-motivator as well, to embrace the challenge, to lay down your own challenge by fronting up right there at the start. And we said, we're going to face it and we're going to stand there, we're going to look it in the eye, and it doesn't matter who we look at, but we're going to front up. And as it turned out, when we were facing the haka, some of the guys got quite charged up and they started advancing us. We started, slowly edging forward towards it, and which in itself was quite inspiring.
And you mentioned Jonah Lomu there. Did you have a plan for him going into the game? You got quite early sight of him, didn't you, in the game, running full tilt at you? But
yeah, it wasn't pretty.
I'm sure it wasn't. What was the plan? Because you see him running full tilt. What are you thinking? Your man, or you waiting for one of the big guys to come across?
Look, I mean, At the time I weighed 83 or 84 kgs, you know, not the biggest fly half that ever played the game. I'm certainly small compared to Jonah or the modern day players, but we decided that the best way to defend him was in numbers. You know, to leave someone exposed one-on-one against Jonah was an impossible task. And whatever we did, we tried to have it, you know, limit his options, limit his space, and make sure that there were at least two guys who could get onto him. We stood a little wider. We tried to push him infield. When he came down those middle channels, we had, you know, Mark Andrews played number 8 in the final, a big second row. We tried to get him to help fill that space. He made 1 or 2 tackles on Jonah. Just also as the sort of leader of our defensive structure, was in behind and made a couple of good tackles. So one-on-one, he was impossible to defend against, no matter who you were. And you know, we saw Yapi Mulder make a good tackle using the touchline as his number 2. James held his collar once or twice, and other guys got in and helped make the tackle. He was really a beast, and you know, this first icon of the game of rugby union. He was an icon for a reason. He was sensational, and we said stand wide, push him into the traffic, and let's hopefully let the traffic do its job. And I think to a great extent, it's exactly how it worked out. Unfortunately, it was successful for us.
Yeah, you mentioned Joost van der Vesthuizen there as well, and he was fantastic that day and almost catapulted his career off the back of that. You have a really good relationship with him in the lead up to that. How was your relationship playing 9 and 10 that day?
No, it was brilliant. You know, we played a fair bit together. We got on as mates, and I mean, we came from different cultures, and we thought differently about, you know, certain things, and we didn't always agree on everything. But that's what makes good combinations. You know, the ability to debate and to think differently, to do things differently. And I think most importantly, we understood each other's strengths and weaknesses, and we had a great trust in each other. And you know, to give you a little example, there were times where I would call for him to do things. He'd look at me like I was mad, but it was my faith in him saying, you know, go around the blind side and have a go. You know, no one's going to tackle you. You're going to get through and you're going to make yardage, or you're going to go and score. But believe in yourself. There were other times where I said, give me the ball, and he would be thinking blindside, and he'd look at me like I was mad on that occasion too. But a great guy, and quite possibly one of the greatest scrum halves who's ever graced the field. Certainly one of the best, maybe the best. And for all of us, a great example. You know, even to his last few days, he was unbelievably inspirational in the way he fought motor neuron disease, in the way he went about his life, even in a wheelchair, right, you know, when he couldn't speak. Just an incredible character.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, I met him a couple of times. He was over in the UK at a Matt Hampson charity game, Matt Hampson Foundation. Yeah. It was just an absolute honour to meet him, not just because of the way that he played the game, but I think the way in which he fought his challenge head on, similar to Doddy Weir.
Doddy, yeah.
Right now, I mean, it's We spoke about the pressures in the lead up. I think for you personally, being a kicker, and we've seen that in any big match, but you know, the World Cup probably being the obvious, is the difference a lot of the time comes down to the kicker. Pressure as a fly half going into that game, knowing that it could come down to 2 or 3 points.
Yeah, so I mean, I always laugh about it, and I tell people this a little bit tongue in cheek, but it's probably true. Sometimes I think the Flavs, we may be the guys who kick the goals, but I think sometimes we're the most stupid guys on the field. We're the guys who don't always understand the pressure, or who don't realize it, you know, and as a result, we have natural inbuilt coping mechanisms. I think in the modern day, psychologists and psychiatrists have developed programs to help people cope with that type of pressure. The pressure of taking kicks at goal, you know, where there's time to think of kicking a ball off a kicking tee, and all these, you know, wayward thoughts can get into your mind. But for me, I was blessed with an ability to shut out all the pressure, and it didn't matter what the kick was, how important it was. For me, I had a little routine. I always stuck to it. It always kept me sane, and in that moment, I managed to block out all the big pressures. And I think you'll probably find it's the same for all the Flavs around the world who've managed to kick goals under pressure. It's an ability, and it's a responsibility you take on, knowing you have that ability.
How much practice and how much thought went into the drop goals before that game?
So we didn't have any set moves where we said, right, we're going to, you know, number 8's going to pick and drive here, he's going to ruck out, we're going to move the ball there, and then we're going to go for the drop ball. We had no set moves, but Kitch Christie did say to me on the Thursday afternoon, we were the forwards were doing a line-out session, and I was doing some extra kicking practice. And he came over and he chatted and he asked me, why don't you kick more drop goals? He said, they're the easiest form of points in the game. I said, well, that's easy for you to say. You don't have Zinzan Brook and Mike Brewer and all these guys trying to, charge the ball down and put you under pressure and smash you and knock you over. But what he did, he planted the seed. And, we obviously did a bit more extra kicking on the Thursday afternoon, and on the Friday at Ellis Park, I kicked a whole lot and I was striking them beautifully. And the fact that he planted that seed meant that during the game, when I kicked the 2, it wasn't so much a matter of saying, right, we've got a scrum here, or this is happening, let's set up some space for the drop goal. It was more a matter of on the spur of the moment, here's an option, here's an opportunity. The first one, play had come to a bit of a halt. It was a slow, static ball. There was not much on. So it was an easy option. And the last one was more a matter of saying, here's an opportunity. We're not sure when we're going to get down here again. Let's take the points. And unfortunately, they both went over.
And so was it called for? So, let's fast forward to extra time. Was it called for? Was it instinctive? I mean...
Yeah, it was probably more instinctive. When I actually kicked it, we had a back row move called, and I could see from the way that we were lined up and the way the All Blacks were lined up, they'd obviously studied our moves. We'd done the move a couple of times in the tournament, and I could see they had it defended, and I could see exactly where Bashop's focus was. He was focused very much on Joost, and part of that, I suppose, is when you're that focused on following the scrum off round to the blind side, there's a little gap for the fly off, whether you want to run or kick. And Mertz was standing a little bit wider, which meant there was a little bit of a gap for me to step into and make the kick. So I called to Joost, and he trusted me, as we spoke about it earlier, and sent the ball back. And he cancelled the back row move and overruled Francois Pienaar, which not many people do. And we sent it back and we kicked the drop.
How hard was it in them 6 minutes to stay in control? You must have been absolutely buzzing, knowing that if they don't score another point, then you've won the game.
So firstly, let's chat about the mindset. So Kitch Christie had always said to us, and I had a private discussion with him once, and I'd said to him, we're doing all this fitness training. Surely we should do more of the skills and game plan and strategy. He said, no, the fittest team will win the World Cup. So when we went to extra time at 9-all, we were standing on the field there in a huddle. We stood there. We were fit and strong. We thought we had the upper hand. We thought, going into extra time, we've got the legs here. We're going to go on and win this. And so when the drop went over, it's about being in the moment. The drop went over. There was a little moment of celebration. Yes, we're ahead now. And then immediately I stopped and waited for Francois as we were running back and spoke about the next move. It was immediately you start thinking, what next? It's still 6 or 7 minutes. We still have to defend like Trojans. We have to stop Jonah from scoring. And the way to do that is to get our hands on the ball, to make them start or play in the right spaces on the field. So I said to him, just make sure the guys are concentrating. Make sure we win the kickoff. Gather the ball. I'm going to hoof it along. Let's go straight back down there. Put them into their half, and let's make sure we make them start from deep. And that's exactly what happened.
There was another couple of things that I heard around the 2003 World Cup, obviously being here in the UK, and the significance of them winning that. But I remember Delalio talking about, and Martin Johnson mentioning when they went into extra time, and obviously the excitement on the pitch, you don't go back into the changing room, is the coaches come on, don't give away a penalty, don't do this, don't do that. And the coaches were starting to panic, Clive Woodward and Andy Robinson, but it was actually the players that had to bring that kind of level of control. And we've seen iconic leaders, Richie McCaw in recent years, and Francois Pienaar. What was he like as a captain? Really interested to know. Because sometimes as a forward, and we saw Martin Johnson in that kind of role, the enforcer of physicality, but I'm just interested to know how he was. He speaks so well now, but in them old school eras, playing for South Africa, the most physical team on the planet, how did he manage that whilst having the control amongst you guys?
So actually, I just got off the phone with him. I was chatting to him this morning just before our call. So I had the privilege of playing with Martin at the Leicester Tigers as well. And Jono and Francois are very different in their leadership styles. Jono was always this big, hard guy, didn't say a whole lot. And when he spoke, you just sat up and you listened and we followed. He set this unbelievable example. Francois set that example, but he is a great orator. You mentioned he speaks wonderfully now, and as a captain, he was like that as well. He said the right thing at the right time. He was great at inspiring us. And I think his combination with Kitch Christie as well was a very important one. They both understood each other. They both worked together a lot as coach and captain. Kitch enabled Francois a lot of the time to impart the message, the coaching message to us. So Francois had this, more encompassing role than just on the field captain. So when we got into extra time and to go back again, we knew we were that fit. Francois again just enhanced the positive stuff, just like Lawrence told you, just like the players do, because every now and then there is a negative type of element that can sneak in, but you know what it's like as a player. You never see the negative. It doesn't matter when you're down by 40 points. It's somewhere deep down inside. You're still trying to cut the deficit and score and chase the game. You don't sit there and think, well, we're going to lose by 40. Let's try and make sure it's not 70. It's always about let's go and score. Let's get the ball. It's about setting little goals. And Francois was a master at that, and very positive leader, strong. Set the example, and we followed. It was like any great leader. He led by example, and he led with some really incredible, inspiring words.
How did that game, Joel, change the face of the country? I know it changed the face of rugby and the sport, but how did it change? Was there any change after that? I know, once the excitement for a few celebration, the iconic visuals of Nelson Mandela on the pitch. But did anything change off the back of that?
So I think a lot changed. I think, Nelson Mandela came out of jail in, I think, the 1992, if I remember correctly. We had our first fully democratic election in 1994. It was a period of uncertainty for us. It was a period of people not knowing, where we were going, what the political landscape would look like in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 3 years' time. And I think we had this iconic leader, Nelson Mandela, who we still at that point we didn't really know him. We weren't sure of what his views were. We didn't know how forgiving he was. We didn't know how much he valued sport as a conduit to bringing people together in our country until post the Rugby World Cup final. He came to see us before the Rugby World Cup final, in fact, before this World Cup started, and said to us, he will ensure that we have the support of the whole nation. And which was, at that point, we were a whites-only team. Chester wasn't in the side yet. And then he came and wished us luck before the final, and he wore that Springbok shirt onto the field at the final, and he had every single Afrikaner in the stadium shouting, Nelson, Nelson, Nelson. He couldn't have... So let me rephrase that. Did rugby unite our country? No, it didn't. Nelson Mandela united our country around a Rugby World Cup final, around an event. And we were privileged to play a minor role in helping and doing something that he used to such great good. And did it change our country? Absolutely. We had this period of positivity, of unity, of trying to, grow together into this new molded South Africa, where 11 different cultures and languages come together and form a new country and try and forgive and forget, the horrors of the past. And I think we had a real golden patch for a time. In 1996, our football team won the African Cup of Nations. I think that helped enormously and did exactly the same. And we've had dramas since. We've had bad times. We've had one or two bad presidents. We've had times which we're not proud of. We have massive corruption, and we have political issues that we deal with. But certainly post-Rugby World Cup 1995 and 1996 African Cup of Nations, there was a time where our nation was very happy and working together towards unity. And so, yes, it did play a major role.
And then you fast forward now with Nelson looking down. I suppose if there was a history book to be written, you probably couldn't have written it how it has been written now off the back of the World Cup, and Siya Kolisi, the first black man to captain South Africa and lift a World Cup off the back of that. Could you imagine? Well, I suppose you could. And off that day, and I suppose the dream for the country would be for something like that to happen. I sat down with Siya before the World Cup a couple of years ago at the Cape Town Sevens. What a lovely human being that man is, and it was an absolute pleasure and a joy. I mean, you just couldn't write it though, could you?
So I just a little bit about Siya. I sat next to him on a flight back from New Zealand 18 months before the World Cup, and I don't normally travel with in my role as a super sport commentator because I've a number of business interests here, so I prefer not to travel. But 18 months ago, almost 2 years ago, Supersport asked me to go to Australia and New Zealand on that tour, and I said yes. And it was the beginning of the Rassie Erasmus era, and it was the beginning of Siya Kolisi's era as captain. And I spent, obviously, that 2 weeks in the camp, and then I sat next to Siya on the flight back to South Africa. And I share your view wholeheartedly. Siya is this incredible man. He is humble. He's down to earth. He comes from a really modest background. He comes from an impoverished background. There were times where he didn't know where his next meal was coming from. He didn't know whether he should eat now before school or eat later before rugby training, because there was only one meal a day. You know, he knows what suffering is. He knows what it means to be poor in any man's terms. So for him to come through the ranks, become the player he's become the leader he's become, for him is the most sensational achievement. It is a dream come true. For us, for the rest of us, it's one of those inspirational stories that we can all take great heart from, and that every single person in our country should take great heart from, because, you know, we all aspire to give the kids of today hope. We all aspire to, you know, ensure they are educated and that they have a future. But there's a young man who has actually overcome every single hurdle in front of him, who's managed to achieve those goals. And in some people's views, they may be impossible goals. And in doing so, change the world. And to your point, you know, if Madiba is able to look down on us right now, he would be smiling with a huge smile on his face when he looks at Siya and the way rugby is again playing a role in uniting our country. And for that matter, not just Siya, you know, that whole squad, you know, they are great ambassadors. They're led by this incredible man. But they've all been wonderful ambassadors for us as a country and for the game of